Hey, special educators, I'm Jennifer from Positively Learning. Welcome to the Special Educators Resource Room. If you're like me, you're always looking for ways to save time and streamline your work. That's why this podcast was created, to give you the systems and solutions you need to get your time back. Tune in for tips, tricks, and tools that will help you manage your workload and make the most of your time. Whether you're brand new or experienced, all are welcome in the Special Educators Resource Room. Hey, special educators, it's Jennifer from Positively Learning. Thanks for joining me here. This is a really fun topic. It's all about environmental print. Now, I love this topic and you probably are already familiar with what environmental print is, but just in case, here is a very quick definition. Environmental print is the print we see in our environment. It's in the real world. Things that we see all day in our daily routines. Think of street signs, packaging on food. If you are getting yourself a cup of coffee and you see the word Starbucks, or maybe it's a box of cereal, but it's that print that we see in our everyday lives. I love environmental print so much as a teaching tool because it helps our students engage in the real world around them, but it also gives them a chance to apply all of those skills that it seems like we're learning sometimes in isolation. Think of your phonics lesson. Maybe you are working on a sound spelling for bossy R, the R controlled, and you are using a word list with your students, which makes sense. And you're choosing words where they can apply and hear the sound, and they're going to have some success with. So maybe these words are arm, farm, barn. I'm trying to think of one syllable words. And my students in this lesson might be doing a great job. And then the next day or next week, we come back to it and it's like starting all over again. That is why I love to use environmental print. Think about the bossy R sound out in the real world. Starbucks, Target, Arby's, Walmart. There's so many examples, and our students see these things day in and day out, and they can make a connection. And that connection is where that retention is going to go. That's why I love using environmental print so much. Now, I know I am preaching to the choir. You already know all of this, but in this episode, I want to go over some easy ways that you can add even more environmental print into your everyday learning. I think this is a great topic to talk about any time of year, but as I'm recording this, we are winding down the school year. You're probably already on a well-deserved break, and you may be even thinking about back to school and setting up your room and creating an environment our students are going to thrive in. And in this episode, I hope these ideas will make it to the top of your list, especially as you're setting up a print-rich environment. Let's get started. The first idea you probably are already doing. Think about your classroom and around the school. There's probably signs helping everyone find where they're supposed to be going. Maybe it's the office. Maybe it's a sign on the restrooms. Maybe inside your classroom, it is labels. You're labeling the trash can and the pencil sharpener and all of those everyday tools. Where else can you add more familiar environmental print? Maybe you could take a tour of the neighborhood where your students live and snap some photos. Are there some street signs that they see all of the time? I taught in the city, so my students were definitely in a print-rich environment that had a corner store, a gas station, those street signs, and so on. So if I could snap one of those as I'm focusing in on a phonics sound spelling, my students can immediately say, wait a minute, I know that. I've seen that. That's right by my house. That's a strong connection. In addition to these types of labels, I was always looking for a way to incorporate community signs in my classroom. So for example, we had a sensory bin. It was an adult supervised activity, the way that we had it set up. So I had an open and closed sign on the sensory bin, and it was exactly like an open and closed sign you'd see like in a old-fashioned shop, where you flip it over. It was exactly what you'd see there. You might have a exit sign. Maybe you already have one in your school, but if you don't, that's something that you can add because we want our students to be familiar with what these signs mean. That's life skills in addition to seeing text in our everyday lives. Maybe your classroom isn't set up where you can use these community sign and images in that way, but you could create a focus wall or add them to a word wall, or even just print them out and create a task box where students can sort these images with text or match them. I also love to read the book I See Signs Everywhere, or something like that. It's a classic book. I love to read it near the beginning of the year. Not that my students were able to independently decode these words at this time, but they were familiar with these signs and they recognized them, and we stopped and talked about them. I love to do this activity near the beginning of the year and then have the book accessible, whether they want to grab that for independent reading or we pull it into a small group. And think about other read aloud books. I always wanted my students to be engaged in high quality literature. And so we used read alouds at least twice a day, every day. And those books were available for my students after that. So I also liked to skip the classroom decor and instead use books. So I had a ledge where the books were displayed. I had all of my bins were facing in such a way where you could see the whole cover of the book. So when you looked at our classroom library, you were looking at the covers, not the spines, if that makes sense. And I always had the books displayed, and my students loved looking at them because they were beloved characters and, gave that warm, fuzzy feeling. But I do remember also there was a time where we were doing a spelling test, which is a whole nother conversation about that development appropriateness. But we were doing a spelling test and my student was spelling the word duck because it was testing our application of the digraph at the end of the word duck. And he loved the book Duck for President. And that book was displayed in our classroom library because we had read it previously. And he looked over at it. And then he looks over at me. And I think he thought to himself that he was cheating because he was looking at that cover and referencing it to spell the word on the spelling test. And he's looking at me and I'm looking right back at him. And I'm thinking, how amazing. You're using your environment to help you. That is what I want you to do. That's a much higher level skill that I wish for you to have than to take the spelling test. I mean, think about our own lives as adults. How many times do you look on your phone for a spelling or to make sure you're using a word in a correct way? Now, I mentioned earlier that you can look in your students' everyday travels in their neighborhood. What do they walk by when they're walking to the bus stop or walking towards school? What types of signs do they see? And I did that, and the way I incorporated it was most often as some type of hook. So if I was teaching, I'm going to use that example of Bossy R. If I was teaching that, I might bring out the picture of a sign of Arby's or Walmart. And I'm just trying to think of what's near my students' environment that they'd be familiar with. And I'm having them say the word with me. Think about Chuck E. Cheese. I mean, that's an amazing one for the digraph, right? There's so many different words out there that are much more sophisticated than those word lists that we use with our students. So this isn't something you want to purchase online, but instead maybe take a walk through the neighborhood. So during a lesson, if I'm introducing a new sound, I might use these types of flashcards with these signs, having my students say and listen to the sounds. I might use that as a hook. They love it. It also could go up on a word wall or a sound wall so that my students can make that strong connection between what they're hearing and what they're seeing. So easy, so effective. All right, this next tip is the one that I really hope you do. I did this every single year. I have it in a blog post. I will post the link in the show notes. Be sure to check it out. All right, so what I did is I wanted to use my students' environment, and I used teachers' names as practice for phonics skills. So what I did is I would snap a photo of a teacher and put it on a card. And you can see these pictures in the blog post. And then I wrote out their name, and I did color code whenever it made sense to highlight sound spellings that were very familiar in the K through 2 scope and sequence. So let's just take the example of Miss Smith. So Smith has a lot going on, right? It's a one-syllable word. We have a consonant blend at the beginning. We have a digraph at the end. And so my students would be looking at the word Miss Smith. I would have the picture covered with whether my hand or you could put sticky notes on it, and they would apply what they know. And then I would move the picture and they could check their work. Hey, that's Miss Smith. I know her. So I did this for all of the people that my students see at school, and we had a huge school. So I had like 50 flashcards, and I would snap photos of everybody. And so this is serving so many purposes because my students were applying their phonics skills, but they were also getting to know their environment and everybody in the school. Now, I did this the first year, and it took quite a while to snap everyone's photo, print them out, and make these flashcards. But then every year after that, I would just add to it if we had new staff. So if you can imagine, there's me at the summer PD when we come back, and I am walking up to new staff and I'm introducing myself. Hey, I'm Jennifer. If you don't mind, I'd like to snap your photo because I want my students to be familiar with you and your name. And I did that. And staff loved it. There were a few teachers who had unusual sound spellings, and I was jumping up and down because I thought, oh, this was so hard to find. And now I've got some examples for my students to practice. So that is my number one tip. It is so much fun. I also would keep these in an independent center or a task box so my students could also just independently look at these, and you should see them flipping through these cards, loving that they get to see their teachers and so fun and their pictures. It just was so special. Now, if that is not going to work for you, for your situation, maybe you teach online, you could always make very similar cards using pop culture references. Who do your students like to listen to? Taylor Swift. Oh my goodness. Think about that name. There's so much going on there that we could focus on. And maybe it's favorite movies, songs, TV shows, games, food. There's endless possibilities. I hope these tips were helpful. I know they were very simple, but they didn't require investing in money and a big program, but instead using the environment around you. And I'm excited for you to try them out. You'll have to let me know how it goes. Be sure to check out the blog post so you can see what our cards looked like. And I appreciate you listening. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you next time. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'm dying to ask, what'd you think? Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. You can find the show notes and links for everything mentioned in this episode at positivelylearningblog.com. See you next week for more special education solutions.